It is now 6:30. So. Today we're joined by Professor Jack Smith doing a presentation on the history of foresight. So he's going to start with introducing foresight and follow with a 50-year history of the brief timeline of Canadian political foresight.
Thank you for coming out on this very cold evening. Apologize for my voice. It's weak because I have a Parkinson condition. That's why we have the microphone. Can you hear?
Yes. Yep.
Maybe it might be useful to put it up on a chair.
Can you hear Jack? Because I can help if you need help. Yes. Just to get you on the camera.
Fairly quickly. Everywhere there's digital transformation. Represent broad developments in the digital world that are transforming our world.
It's online.
Okay. So, what is foresight? Foresight is really a series of strategic tools and approaches that support decision making in the present with adequate lead time for societal adjustment preparation. Key attributes of foresight: multiple plausible contingent scenario, 5 to 25-year horizon, rehearsal for potential futures. It's not premised on prediction. It's really about anticipation. Anticipating multiple plausible futures. Here, conceptual diagram. 4 or 5 scenario with 2 wildcards. Scenarios are stories with implication and rich content relevant to the challenge, needs, and
wanted to ask is, we didn't put a context on this presentation, right? So are all of you familiar with foresight as a concept to start with? As one of these tools that's used by futurists to speculate on the future, but it's a structured technique which Jack is presenting. And he's actually, because it wasn't introduced other than as professor, he's an international authority in this subject area and has done this work all over the world. In fact, some of his recent work has been with the nanotechnology strategy for Russia, and some work he was doing in Malaysia on this with Johnson. I'm not sure where the area of application was, but it was foresight.
Sorry, my communication abilities are limited. One thing that's important is to have lenses to build a scenario. Typically, these are the types of questions you'd ask of a scenario. I'll show you how to structure a scenario in a moment. Terminology is important. So we talk about things like scenario logic and critical uncertainties. These are part of the structure that are necessary to build good scenarios. The starting point is to do a scan, and scanning starts with the disaggregation of the world into trends, drivers, and shocks. Trends are things that are developing gradually and which apply to all scenarios. They're very broad and enduring. Here are a list of some macro trends that you can use as a list of checklist sort to develop your trend line.
Sorry, is it possible to go a little bit slower? So,
To read all the things?
yeah, because at least half of those stuff we can read. Thank you.
Typically, in a scenarios exercise, you would spend about an hour or two on this list. Critical drivers are more important for scenarios. They reflect the areas that may be available to control or which directly impact your scenario. Once you have a list of 6 or 7 of these, you'll want to do an analysis subjects the two most critical uncertainties, which tend to be the drivers of change, which are both highly impactful and have the highest level of uncertainty. Here's an example of some fairly current technology change drivers in the ICT area. And then you have your shocks and wildcards, which are the high impact, low probability events like 9/11 and or a nuclear accident or some similar event that shakes up the fundamental and alters the trajectory of change. Here's some potential wildcard over the next 10 to 20 years, identified through John Brockman's book, The Next 50 Years, published about 5 years ago or so. To have a workshop to develop scenario takes usually a minimum of 1 day. You can do it in an afternoon if you do some preparatory work. And this outlines what would be done by the group versus the planners. Next stage in scenario development is to populate your templates using the lenses. And then you can backcast. These are different tools that are useful. Typical agenda. Using classic scenario logics developed around dual axes, and you first need to identify what the axes are and what a
Excuse me for a second. I just got an email from Bart. Can you people hear Jack okay? Yeah. Is there a problem? Okay, because he's having trouble online. Several people online I can see here. Okay, just wondering, maybe if you could, is there a volume control?
Maybe the computer has to be near the...
well, it's the cameras up there.
Oh, okay. I see. This would also be applicable, it seems, to the current GMO. This is like perfectly appropriate to.
Yes.
Yeah, interesting.
So, one thing about having 4 scenarios is that they're all judged to be plausible because of the uncertainty factors. So you need to evaluate each one distinctly in terms of how you might work through the scenario to get to where you want to be. So the answer was basically more science, quicker response, and managing public expectation. Here again are some other animal health scenarios. These are success factors that Professor Jonathan Kilo and I at University of Ottawa have discerned and published. They determine whether or not public foresight is successful. Basically, scenarios are about learning and opening strategic conversations about the future. And here are some sources of global foresight information if you want more information. At the end of part 1, part 2 is the timeline.
Any questions or comments? We can start a dialogue.
I'm really glad you're focused on the the two axes of uncertainty and the four different scenarios. I know that Horizons Canada sort of uses the sort of standard scenarios, which I think are like, you know, muddle through, and you know, and I think those are less powerful in terms of stretching our minds, because I think key to what you said is all of these scenarios have to be judged as plausible, and that's why the real role of critical uncertainties is so important. I never quite understood that until tonight in the way you said it.
That's right. And furthermore, the critical uncertainties allow you to focus where you are in time today.
Yes.
On the charts, and then direct your attention toward what you would do to get to where you want to be.
Riel Miller has an interesting piece that he's been working on, and I saw YouTube of him, and he was anticipating the future, and so he poses this question, and I loved it because every single person does this. How do you use the future, right? And I think, again, I'm so glad that you chose the uncertainties that force these scenarios to be plausible, because that question is, how will we use the future, right? I think
that's a good starting point for this next part of the discussion.
But some part of the future also are built based on the trust, not just uncertainties. We need both trust and uncertainties.
Well,
if there's a lack of trust, you cannot think about the future, because everything would be uncertain.
again, when you look at the trends, you see these. But in terms of developing scenarios, uncertainty becomes the critical point to develop, because each scenario will have those trends in there.
Yes.
Right? Including trust, and yes,
Because
the sun will rise tomorrow.
Because see, the scenarios could be analyzed in two, let's say, frames, or let's say two kind of, let's say, scenarios. One of them would be physical world, and one of them the humanistic or human world. And it's a little different. So in physical world, for sure, we're dealing with a lot of uncertainties, because we don't know what's
We're
happening.
probably dealing with more uncertainty in the human world than in this
Yeah,
world.
but in human world, we need some kind of trust.
Well,
talk about it.
but see, the uncertainties incorporate the trust. The uncertainties enable us to create 4 plausible scenarios where all those trusted trends are in, but to see them through a different light, as a plausible light. So it's not it's the critical use of uncertainty to examine how those uncertainties will shape the things we can trust, because they will create 4 different worlds with the same trusted forces, right? Based on the things that are uncertain.
Yes.
All right, so it's not a either or, it's really an and.
One of the critical things, though, to populate those scenarios, which Jack was just outlining, is in fact deciding how to label the axes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I've been in a discussion with Jack and some other folks recently on an exercise we're conducting at the university in a few weeks, and we spent like hours discussing what are the axes.
Yeah. That's a fundamental part of the hard work, you know, because you should have done all the trend analysis, right? You should look, everybody should have some sort of accordance. Yes, these are the trusted trends, these are, but finding out which are the uncertainties that are important to your particular question, right? Because your question may have different uncertainties than another question. And so finding that out is what helps you create these 4 real, plausible worlds from which you can go to how we're going to use the future.
Take critical uncertainty and axiom, and you want to have the polarity is well defined. Here are three types of uncertainties with different timelines. First area, you have pause, 4 to 25 years. And then you have scientific, technological uncertainty, which typically is about 5 to 15 years. And then you have sociocultural, which tends to be longer term. Table 2 identifies 3 generations of foresight with timelines roughly about 15 to 17 years in each case. And these are identified by their character and by the sponsorship of government. We're now entering the 4th generation of foresight, I believe, and it is starting 2017, and its shape is not entirely clear yet. So, I'm ready to start looking at the timeline, starting in 1966 with the formation of the World Future Society. Expo 67 Montreal was an important milestone as well. It provided a spark for many young Canadians interested in the future, and it showed that Canada was ready for worldly involvement and could bring innovative
Yes. You want me to say something about it? Yes, okay. This afternoon, or noon today, I gave an address by invitation to the Club of Rome, which is an international group concerned with the future. You've probably heard of, anyone not heard of the Club of Rome? Okay. So you've heard of limits to growth, and you've not heard of limits to growth as a concept. That was the first major piece of output from the Club of Rome. So it was very Malthusian in its day.
Started in the
started in the 70s. I've been involved with Club of Rome in and out of it since the mid-80s. And I spoke today about my particular views on the history and the future of artificial intelligence. And particularly looking at geopolitical implications of artificial intelligence and other policy-related areas, because that's the sort of audience I was talking to. And I use Foresight in some of that activity.
1972 was a particularly fruitful year in that the Limits to Growth study was published, as well as Future Shock by Alvin Toffler.
Meadows and Meadows are the authors. It's a husband-wife team of Limits to Growth, along with Future Shock.
In 1973, Ted Gordon, president of the Futures Group, a U.S. consultancy, was a featured speaker at a meeting held in a Senate meeting in December 72. And as well, 1973, the first world energy crisis happened. Shell created 7 scenarios and found that the outlier, the one initially judged to be the least likely, actually occurred. That was the global supply crunch. And they saw correctly how it happened and used that to position themselves subsequently. Also, the Advanced Concept Center of Environment Canada was created. It was to demonstrate how environmental innovation could be relevant to longer-term stewardship for all. 1974, the Canadian Urban Demonstration Program was launched by Ministry of State Urban Affairs. This relied in part on an unsolicited proposal program that was subsequently used by groups like McDonald, Telfer, and others to develop Canadian space capability. In 1974, the Democrats gained control of the Congress and created the Office of Technology Assessment as the first institutional base for foresight. In 1975 saw the beginning of awareness of the energy futures crisis, and the Office of Energy Conservation was opened at
It's actually about a minute and a half delay from the real time to what you see on the screen. So when the slides change, especially with the dates, it's about a minute later that you see the next dates for us. You're here in the real time.
So the latency, this would not be a video game.
Although it may all work, because I hear Jack in real time with the slides.
The Canadian Association of Future Studies was created in 1906, and then in 77, Science Council of Canada developed the Conservers Project, which was a big undertaking led by at the University of Montreal. I was hired by Canada Origin Housing Corporation to work on neighborhood improvement. It was my first job in the federal government, and it brought a foresight perspective to the work. '78 was the UN. Sorry. 1978 saw the environmentally appropriate technology program for Canada.
I think it's useful to note, if I may, given this environmental emphasis you've seen in the later 70s, Canada was the first country in the world to have a Department of Environment, which was created, I think, in 1969.
In 1979, I was one of the organizers of the Ottawa Futures Fair at the University of Ottawa, where we had various speakers and demonstrations of technology, including Bell Northern researchers, digital switch, solar collectors, and holistic health service. These are all, as well as a speaker who at the time we thought was a bit crazy, talked about all the things you could do with the wireless spectrum. People didn't believe it, but subsequently it's all been revealed as possible. The second global oil crisis happened in 1979 with the Iranian hostage situation, and Joe Clark's conservative government was elected and then defeated several months later. The second global oil shock resulted in governments creating the National Energy Program.
I don't know whether many of you would, or any of you other than possibly John and Jack would remember these oil shocks that he speaks of here. But these were some times when there were lineups at gas stations throughout North America. When
Yes.
Ronald Reagan lowered the speed limit in the United States on interstate highways. It was a profound impact on the North American European economies.
And the thought of violence at the pumps
Yes.
scared the chiefs of decision makers.
The fuel apocalypse.
first time in 1980, the largest attendance ever, over 7,000 people at a World Future Society meeting. And it was typical of Future's interest in technologies and the first generation of Foresight. And in the same year was the first referendum in Quebec, which created a degree of complacency in the rest of Canada that was only disturbed again in 1995 with the almost near-death experience. It's called by some commentators over the second referendum. 1981, Trudeau came back to power with a focus on and determinants of social order. The mid-1980s saw an increasing emphasis on competitiveness. And the CFAR on population health, superconductivity, and robotics laid the basis for subsequent research in areas by Canada's universities. The superconductivity work related to work in quantum material that continues today. 1988, Mulroney government was re-elected, and the so-called free trade trade strategies require futures perspective to be successful. 1989, the Interdepartmental Committee for Futures and Forecast was set up by the Canadian government. This consisted of about 40 experts from different departments. and the first chronicle of Ottawa Futures by Fred Thompson. Looking back, the future, a book, a self-published book on futurism in Ottawa. And then in '93, the NRC established the Futures and Strategies Network in response to the termination of the ICF. At the same time, the world was shifting back to liberalism, and the Liberal Red Book had prominent pieces on technology, futures, and a renewed role for the NRC. And 95 were formative years. As much analysis took place and scenarios were developed, and as well technology strategy areas that helped guide the program. I was intimately involved in exercises. By 1996, the PRS Policy Research Secretary, which became subsequently Horizon Scan, was created as part of the Privy Council, and there was a publication by Mr. Van der Eed, part of the Shell on the scenario methodology. 1998, the APEC Center for Technology Foresight in Bangkok was created with the assistance of NRC and the National Research Council.
was a period in the 80s and 90s, such as the symposium that Jack mentioned in the States, where the more conservative governments in both Canada and the United States were closing think tanks.
Yes.
In the Office of Science and Technology Assessment in the U.S., which I thought was a really excellent organization. I worked with people there. And was an example there, and here was our Science Council, as well as our Economic Council.
In fact, I think before the Mulroney government came in, every department had a strategic unit. And so that was sort of as I became a public servant, and within a short order of time, each department was closing down or downsizing the strategic units. And it wasn't until the Liberals got back in this, as Jack pointed out, that new units started to appear, and was really the beginning of re-looking at foresight. And every government department had again, and this changed after Harper, but while the Liberals were in power, each department started having a strategy or a foresight unit, and thus the interdepartmental community was sort of based on these old strategic, linking up people and that sort of stuff. And the Policy Research Initiative also was, again, trying to strengthen each of these shops in every department and to sort of provide a model. And so there's been these waves of
coming, going. But what is the philosophy behind the conservatives' action or reaction against the, let's say, think tanks, or especially those policymakers?
Well, I think you probably have to ask those people at the time. I'm not sure why they did so, but one of the things is clear, and you saw this in Jack's notes earlier, in reference to the changing. They didn't dismantle the organization, but they changed its profile, they changed its remit. So instead of looking at major environmental issues, energy independence, or at least security, they focus more on things like helping business, helping the economy.
It's part of government shouldn't be involved in picking winners. We should let the free market run, right? Keep government out, and so by strengthening businesses, you're letting the free market, the invisible hand, because government shouldn't be involved. I think that's
a basic
philosophical
philosophical position.
In 2000, NRC issued its third long-range plan called Designs that Work for Canada, which reflected the technology emphasis of the NRC, and led by Dr. Arthur Carty. I held the pen on that report and managed planning and assessment at NRC on his behalf, as well as the U.S. Proteus Project, which is an intelligence community initiative on the future of intelligence. I'll talk more about that in the next bit.
Just on that, I can just interject for a moment to say that our own agency, that it deals with human intelligence, is, our communications security agency does foresight. They actually do formal foresight and publish internally on foresight.
Communication security establishment.
In 2001, I established the Office of Technology Foresight C, and we had a pilot project involving 10 different departments. And that basically went on as expected until September that year when 9/11 happened, which changed everything. And really issued in the third generation of foresight, public foresight, where the focus was on security and strategies for adapting institutional capabilities and infrastructure in this new world of terrorism and public health threats and other systematic threats. The third generation Foresight started in 2001 and it effectively lasted until 2016 with the election of Justin Trudeau in 2015 November, and then a year later Donald Trump as the president of the U.S. So what happened in the third generation of Foresight? Well, Foresight Canada was created in Calgary by Ruben Nelson and remains active today as a Foresight Network, long-term vision organization, as well as an effort to create the Federal Innovation Networks of Excellence, which is now resurrected as Infrastructure, Science and Technology Infrastructure Canada. The Foresight effort was led by the NRC as its role as chairman of the industry portfolio, where it had a policy role in futures planning, as well as Association of Professional Futurists was created in 2002 in Seattle. The APF today is a very active and excellent professional organization that has past 10 years and continues to play a very active role. 2003, the National Research Council Office of Technology Foresight was invited into the U.S. Proteus Partnership with the U.S. Intelligence Community. This included the National Foresight Office and the U.S. Army War College and the U.S. Naval Graduate School in Monterey. The NRC led the Science and Technology Foresight Pilot Project, which resulted in 12 reports, cost over $1 million, and generated a value added of at least $1 million. was also the first year that the Deputy Minister's Steering Committee for the Public Policy Research Initiative was created. The goal to advise and improve the dissemination of futures work within senior ranks of the public service. Also supported and suggested some changes that eventually led to the creation of Horizon Skill. The APEC Center for Technology Foresight in Bangkok was very involved at this point in work on disease control and on technology foresight. And I worked closely with them several reports. One particular one was on disease, infectious disease futures, in which the staff of the newly created Google Incorporated sent two people from San Francisco to our meeting in Bangkok. In 2007, there was a four futures project on Canada's resource processing industries, report published by Industry Canada. This was done in cooperation with Scenarios Strategy Calgary, managed the scenario. It's quite a good read, and I have several copies of this report. In 2008, the Foresight Synergy Network, which had been created in 2000 in Ottawa, was transferred to Telfer at the University of Ottawa Management School, and I became an adjunct professor.
Can I interject? When Jack was at the Privy Council, he was working with Steph Christensen, and he was working with the provincial government, the provincial governments, the technology industries, and the federal government to sort of really look at and find some sort of consensus around what are the technologies that are worthy of investing in the 5 years. It was really groundbreaking, very good work that when the Conservatives came in was dismantled. And I think was dismantled prematurely. And again, it's the philosophy of government shouldn't be involved in picking winners, but if it had been continued to do this work, I think Canada would be in a profoundly more powerful position now than it is. Just to, that's because I remember that.
When in 2009, we were invited to be part of the Government Foresight Leaders Forum, an international organization of foresight organizations like the UK Foresight after that it sort of demised, it's turned to get back on its feet again, but probably won't not be as vibrant as it used to. Foresight Journal by Elsevier publication. A special issue of Foresight Impact around the world was created by myself and Professor Kayla. And Policy Horizon started publishing its Metascan, which reflected its capabilities as an organization to promote accurate scanning in the future. CFR also continues to do work in the future. In 2013, it launched a program on CFR 2.0 that built on its earlier work and integrating resilience in areas such as nanotechnology and also in terms of quantum computing.
We covered all of that.
Yeah, just put it over.
Yeah.
One of the things that Policy Horizon started doing around that time was offering training courses to employees across departments on foresight. It was quite brilliant and innovative way to start building a foresight community in the federal government. And they would they did this for a couple of years with, I think, up to about 30 to 40 people in this, and started actually creating a community across government departments. And they're still able to sort of, I think they're still building on that community. But that was around that sort of time when they
They're about to launch a new program soon. They've got a new executive director who comes from the World Economic Forum. And we'll see where that goes. The 2012, 2013, 2014, we continued to work with Shirk and others to define future priorities. Policy Rise Canada published Metascan for on Asia and the Future of Canada. The major report is all sorts of threads and implication as we turn more to the Pacific from the Atlantic. This takes us to 2016-17, where the focus of foresight is in transition again, as it contemplates future challenges, big problem, wicked problem, and have a list of these wicked problem areas. I'm suggesting that if pure Trudeau and Justin Trudeau have continuity, then wicked problems are a logical focus for foresight. If on the other hand, the forces of fatalism, Trump and company triumph, then we're in for another dark period of foresight. We'll see which way it goes. Hopefully in the next 8 months or so. I think there are some hopeful signs, such as the Democrats' re-emergence in Congress and Trump's overreaching and his very haphazard wildcard behavior that may doom that exercise. And maybe the Brexit momentum in the UK will shift as well. The UK may actually not have to leave Europe after all. We'll see. Anyways, that is the world of foresight, topsy-turvy world where the forces of sponsorship are important and the choices of practitioners are equally important. Thank you. We now have time for questions.
Thank you. Great. I'm very interested in the next generation. And one of my experiences in 2010, that, this is the American government from 2005 to 2010 ran a program they called the Summer Hard Problem Program. And they had people from all of the acronyms in the American security establishment, FBI, CIA, NSA, all of those guys. In 2010, I was privileged to be able, because in that year they opened it up to the Five Eyes, Australia, New Zealand, Britain, and Canada. And this was a 30-day workshop. So the Office of the Director of National Intelligence rented out in Tempe, Arizona, a whole sort of resort hotel. Closed it all off. We were the only ones there. We had, everyone was given an Apple, an iPhone. We had a secure network. We also had secure SCIFs, right, where we would put the ones we were given outside and use the ones that were inside. We had a secure Twitter-like capability. It wasn't Twitter, but it was like Twitter. So they were doing this for 5 years, and then in 2010, I guess, it was deemed, because it was after the financial, they were recovering, and so they closed it down. But it seems to me that given what's happening in America, right, the sort of the Russians and the Chinese, and that post-Trump, there could very likely be a reawakening or a renewal or a reconstitution of not just the Five Eyes, not just NATO, but the need for those sorts of intensive workshops. So in 2010, the workshop was social media and radicalization. And in 30 days, we had about 90 participants. Every day, we had presentations from industry, from the marine, like 3 presentations a day. It was quite amazing. And we produced like 90 papers in 30 days out of 90, all collaboratively in that sort of stuff. So all of this is to presage that the possibility of a 4th generation of foresight, right? That could be built on the model that was put in there. You could have, I think it's pressing, right? I think this is highly plausible that this level of more integrated, more collaborative. So that was a comment or a question. What do you think?
I think you're correct in anticipating that the basis for a new generation of foresight has been laid. It combines awareness of the technologies and their social impacts and the plight of populations, the wicked problems lesson takes this into account to some degree.
Yeah, so the focus becomes on wicked problems, not just choosing the next winner.
I have a question. I think it's probably pretty easy to answer. Thank you for that presentation, both the beginning and the more thorough timeline. Those are both really, really interesting. I was paying attention to a lot of the names that were coming up during the presentation, and I'm wondering if you could just pick out, most of them were male-presenting names, could you just pick out and suggest like a female foresight expert that we should definitely look into when we get home, who would be contributing to this space historically and who would have some interesting perspectives?
You're right in that it has been a male-dominated perspective, but there have been some women. Joanne Kim in the U.S. project. The U.S. project was on the future of intelligence. Joanne Kim.
Googling her right now.
I don't know if you'll find her or not because she's an intelligence professional in the U.S. and they tend to keep a low profile.
Yeah.
In Canada, I'm just trying to think. The director of the program at OCAD University is a woman. I forget her name.
Esther Dyson.
But
Esther Dyson.
She's a bit of a future.
Daughters
Yeah.
agreement and
Yeah.
the domain name registrar.
I can.
she's in U.S. content. She's an author. Esther Dyson. Very well regarded.
Coming back to someone in Canada, Leah Soroka, spelled S-O-R-O-K-A. I worked with her in Foresight when she was in the Department of Health of Canada. The last I heard, Leah was working with NGOs in Afghanistan. But she is very good at Foresight, and she led the Foresight effort at Health Canada and produced some very interesting materials.
There's some great female women science fiction writers.
Oh yeah.
Annalee Urith, but I mean,
yeah.
but those are Foresight people,
Yeah.
right? And you know, so Annalee Urith's latest novel on AI. Yes.
Died recently, I believe. Leah Soroka is very in Canadian context. She was part of my interdepartmental committee, and I worked with her on future of agriculture and future of health in Canada, where we envisioned a future health system that would be patient-centered and high technology friendly. That work I have most of that work. She also lives in Ottawa.
She anticipated the changing of the name of Agriculture Canada to the the Department of Bioeconomy, right, which was like, it hasn't happened, but.
I have lots of other questions if nobody else does.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, so in the speculative futures community that I work in, we spend a lot of time figuring out how to market, like earmark plausibility. And plausibility is a huge concern to the Foresight community. I'm wondering, we use diegetic prototypes, so we try to, that's a fancy way of saying that we try to align what we're doing with some specific types of trends that you see today, so that people can be like, oh, this feels familiar enough for me in my present space to make this future that I'm experiencing or being shown plausible. Does the Foresight community have specific markers that they use to create plausibility in their scenarios, or does it just sort of depend?
It's done through the discipline of methodology.
Yeah.
And a certain degree of scientific credibility and reference to trends and shocks. So, the plausible has to do with logic. We do a search now. Basically, it's assumed that technology does not go nowhere. There's a track line of development that can be referenced, such as nanotechnology to Richard Feynman back in the 50s. Quantum computing has a timeline, and AI, artificial intelligence. Maybe Peter would want to
What's that now, Jack? AI? Timeline? Okay, he's asking me about a timeline. I can certainly give a timeline about AI. Perhaps it's not as relevant now. I can talk about the future as well, because I've got a 25-year timeline. I've actually used, if you like, a bit of Foresight exercise. You may have seen that in my seminar at the university.
I don't think I attended your seminar.
No? Oh, no, it says. It was Lisa that was there. Anyway, I did project out some characteristics of where I thought the future will be with respect to artificial intelligence, and I've divided artificial intelligence into narrow AI, which is the low-picking fruit, the low-hanging fruit we're harvesting today. And that's equivalent to basically the state of the art today. It's human performance in a very narrow domain. So we can have an AI system that can drive an automobile, but that same system cannot pick and place. So everything is specific to a very narrow application. That's the way AI is today. And it's not general AI. We can pick and place, we can drive a car, we can give a speech, we can do a lot of stuff. That's general AI in terms of mimicking. That's our expectation. Then there's, of course, the sci-fi side of AI, and that's the super intelligent, destroy the world type stuff. There's also, of course, the view that AI will save the world. So there's sort of an in-between. And it's that in-between that is the reality both of that spectrum of save the world. It's not going to save the world in any specific way. It will help improve things, I think. I don't think going to destroy the world in the superintelligence context, certainly not for the foreseeable future, and I mean like 100 years plus, even dealing with non-linear progress. And the third thing is, I lost my train of thought. Just wait.
Can I take a step? Because when Jack talked about the methodology, right? Usually at the beginning there's this very long conversation about what the trends are, right? And so it's not just where they are today, because you want to look at, how long did it take radio? How long did, so you have this large, and where you bring in the experts, but you sort of really want to try to grasp the reality of where trends have been and where they are now. And once you have that, these are the things in the sense where you could trust, right? It's from, once you have that, right, you have the ground of plausibilities because you have that. Then when you choose the uncertainties to create these 4 different worlds, it's those same trends that are in each world, but different because we don't know where what's going to fall off of the uncertainty. So that's the ground of the plausibility.
That's perfectly helpful. Does Foresight have? Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Does Foresight have intentional mechanisms in place to bring in marginalized communities, or?
See, if I can answer that, or when I first started, I read Peter Schwartz, The Art of Long View, and I thought, Foresight 101. I started in '98. But Adam Kahane has written a few really interesting books. Not only was he instrumental in the Mount Flores scenario, which allowed, as Jack said, this peaceful transition, but he's worked in South America where some of the participants are participating via online because they're in jail. Other participants have said, okay, we'll participate, but you have to promise not to shoot us, right? So his books are like the human part of Foresight. How do you create social conditions for people to be able to feel secure, to have their voice? So I don't think in the government we've done that much, and certainly the business hasn't done that much. But from my experience of reading Adam Kahane, you'll get the sort of how do you create the social conditions for real diversity of opinion, the real sharing of personal stories, all of that sort of. He wrote a book about all of his experiences and sort of about elaborating which countries were the hardest. And Canada was the 3rd hardest country he'd ever had to work with. Because Canadians are too polite. They don't say what has to be said.
And there's another Canadian side of rural Alberta. You're not fucking polite.
I have a question, Jack, and that is just in a broad sense, if you could sort of rank, say, the first 6 countries that are actively using Foresight in their core planning exercises.
Switzerland, South Africa, and
Singapore? Singapore?
Singapore, yes.
What about the UK?
The UK has had the best institutional power, but it's lagged with the recent Brexit environment, so it's not as vibrant as it used to. And the US is trying to scramble to contend with Trump, as are we.
What about China? Jeremy Rifkin's been very influential in China. And
China has a program, it's kind of impenetrable to the West. Russia has a good program.
Russia's got more than China. I've not,
Is that right?
I've not I personally haven't had any direct experience of foresight in China, but I have done work in China on their introduction of knowledge management as an exercise, as a process. It was done in a foresight-like way, but it wasn't foresight.
because, I mean, China does these 5-year plans and these, and their
Well, they do even
their
longer.
rapid investment in the new energies and, one would imagine.
They definitely do something like this. I mean, if you look at members of their presidium, if that's the right word, I mean that's the Russian word. But they're senior people. Many of them are engineers. Many of the senior people in the highest ranks of the Chinese government are actually engineers, of high standard engineers, high quality engineers, of different disciplines, not just civil, electrical engineers.
I think that leads to my question. Well, in cases like China, there's actually a lot of political will to implement whatever that's being worked on a foresight level. So, for example, transportation, the railway. If we put it here, it might take the next 30 years
Yes.
to even get started. But
Won't get started.
we'll get started. But on that note, what are the sort of tangible ways to communicate? How can we build more political will to implement what is being discussed in the foresight levels?
Okay, you want to ask them? And then I can revise that.
When Jack was at the Privy Council, I thought his work with the governments, the provincial governments, and industry and federal government, that was really powerful, and I can't see that, in terms of developing political will, that sort of process where if it worked for Mount Flores, right, because it had all the actors, and one of the things that Kahane said that really struck me is once you get people 25 years out, right, you sort of leave today's problems behind, and then from there, if you give them a chance to say, what's your favorite world? What's the world you want, right? And when they can share that world, working back becomes really easy. And I think without something like what Jack was doing in the Privy Council, because it's not just the federal, right? It has to work at all these levels. So you need some sort of thing that he was doing, right? That brings these governments and industry together to put them outside of today.
There is a committee that exists. I've done work for them. It's called, the committee's acronym is ICE. And I cannot, Intergovernmental Committee, and I don't know the E's for it. But it's the City of Toronto, the Province of Ontario, and the Federal Government of Canada. It's all departments of the City of Toronto. It's at least 3 or 4 ministries of the Province of Ontario, and it's several ministries or departments of the federal government. It's all working level.
Yes.
And so these people are, the highest level is probably director. And so they have a remit, and they have responsibilities of certain sorts, but they have to collaborate. And it's about socioeconomic framework stuff in the context of the development of the large metropolitan area of Greater Toronto. And it's a very interesting organization. I was commissioned as an example of what I mean by their interest, and it relates to planning, foresight type things. I was asked to answer two questions. One, how do we use big data to develop public policy? Two, how do we use the big data to deliver public policy? If either or one works, those were the two questions. And my answer was actually a report that's now online. They posted it within a week of when it was received. And it's a set of case studies of what has actually worked elsewhere in governments in this in this area of big data and policy development. And we're using here in our own government right now. There's actually some consultants out on the street are engaged in this. Treasury Board, as you may be aware, is responsible for a lot of development and the final sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Finalization of regulations. And they are using, they have asked the community outside the consulting community to look at how artificial intelligence can be used to help streamline the existing regulations. Like look at all of them, with their thousands of rules, because there's 8,000 regulations or something like that. Anything overlap, conflict, etc., etc. I mean, a team of people couldn't do that in 10 years. So they're using some kind of deep learning approach to this. That's happening right now.
Is that internal or external?
It's internal. I mean, they're just looking into this. It's not an out of operation.
Right.
They're asking Cat AI to do this, and they've awarded a contract, I think 3 contracts, to get some organizations engaged in helping them understand.
Because I don't know many organizations that could do that. I'd be curious who they are. I don't know many organizations that could do that using AI.
Well, there's also pushback happening in the government of Canada right now, and from outside, certain observers say that maybe they're actually starting to do things too soon, that the technology is not mature enough for what they want to apply it to.
Yeah.
Jack? I want to put words in your mouth to sort of see if I'm right. But the slide before was talking about 4th generation and wicked problems, right? Now, from what I understand of wicked problems, is that there's no solution to a wicked problem. There's only solutioning, right? And so to have foresight on that sort of problem, right? Because in a sense, through the generations of foresight, our perspective went from like simple ideas to sort of things that are complicated machines, and now we're sort of seeing these interconnected, ongoing systems that we,
non-linear complex systems.
Non-linear complex adaptive systems, and that requires a new type of organization, like truly like what you were doing in Privy Council, but much wider and bigger, and what you were talking about in terms of these working levels between levels of government, right? And what Riel Miller talks about, and what Singapore seems to be trying to do, is imbue public servants with futures literacy, right? And so this 4th generation of foresight I don't know, it seems to me will have to require a lot more massive conversations and input and understandings, and not just simply from the top down. It has to become imbued in our work. Does that make sense?
That the 4th generation rests upon collaborative learning and experience from the bottom up. And the governments are prone to wanting the world to turn out the way that they envision, which is normal foresight, not collegial, collaborative foresight, or strategic.
I would suggest that that's the case if government is not like if I can use a metaphor here, Harper's government versus those before, many of those before and after. We just have had one after. But the point is that you can have policy-based You can have evidence-based policy development, which is ideal for foresight, or you can have policy-based evidence development, which is totally fiction. And I think if we look at our, in character, we had a decade of policy-based evidence development. In other words, you create the policy and you find evidence to support your point of view, because you already know what's best.
But again, one of the powers of the Mount Flores, and I think foresight, right, is what a foresight exercise produces is less important than the process that the participants experience in developing and what they come away with, right? So part and parcel, I think, of this new sorts of political will is you need many more people engaged in these processes of what's a plausible. How are we going to use the future, right? So, and this is what John Seeley and John Hagel talk about. It's no longer about scaling efficiencies, it's about scaling learning, right? By the time you're efficient, it's already moved, and so how do we scale learning? Well, I think we've got to embed that in collaborative learning, and collaborative,
And continue.
So it's a much more participative foresight process that's ground up. Am I saying what you would agree with?
It's past 8:30.
Yeah,
It is 8:38.
I guess we're done.
Yes, we're done, but I have one last personal-ish question, because I'm really interested in sort of this consumer culture that we're in, and sort of how that ties into, can we change the culture to enable more learning that is more participatory than learning that is more consumer-based? And how do we do that?
Well, I'll say one of the ways is this very kind of event. I mean, the meetups in general as an approach, it's a way of course, it channels people, so there'll be a lot of like-minded individuals who will come into that. But it's not in the narrowest sense like some of the social media, where, you okay, Jack? Where, others can come in, it's open. So this group is very open. I mean, we start to know each other, but it's a very open group. And it's around the issue of the future. And so it's the issue of the future what's the future of a product going to be? Well, that's one area of design, if you like, industrial design. Whereas in the case of the three of us guys, we tended to work with foresight from the point of view of strategic, enterprise, i.e. a policy of a nation or an existential threat of some sort. I mean, these tools are the only things we really have so far. And as Jack has outlined, we've gone through to the on the verge of the fourth generation now, and certainly Jack and his colleagues, us to some extent, have been part of that, developing that fourth thing. But it's still dynamic as well. And so perhaps one of the things is to pick up on this John's comment about the learning, and your interest in the same question. Maybe we should look at, or you could look at a strategy of how to get this into the learning into this kind of environment we just talked about. Maybe an exercise of this might be worthwhile.
I mean, it's interesting. So the concept of a consumer society is actually already passed, right? Bruce Sterling, in his wonderful book, The Shaping Things, talks about, sort of when we were hunters and gatherers, we made everything, right? And then when the age of industry comes along, you get mass-produced things. Then there's a consumer society where there's market segmentation. So you're looking at the 30-year-old ship interest, when you have all these magazines. But now we're in the age of software, the end user, right? And so there's end user agreements, and there's the need for more customization around end user, you know, so I want a unique assemblages of the apps in my thing. And it's also the age of big data, because now when I'm interfacing with the world through an app, you're collecting my data and I'm part of the design team. So there's something, I think, plausible about this emergence of a more even collaborative or participatory consumer that expects more customized products and experiences. I want an experience that delights me. And that's generally not deliverable through a consumer good, you know, mass consumer good, right? So I think we're moving away from just the general consumer society into a much more, well, not just even segmented, but with the assumptions that I want to be delighted and that my interface with things is much more customed, you know, personalized.
But the form will be changed, not the content. In this case, we'll have a different form, but the content and the philosophy will be the same.
I'm not sure. I don't know. You know, I mean, it's a good question. My home will have all these standardized, and has all these standardized Internet of Things, but it will also be my home, customized to my need.
Yeah.
Spotify already is using AI to give me music that I would like.
But the problem also is that it gives them more ability to those who have, and take the more ability from those who don't have. So don't have will be in the same situation, even worse. But those who have will be in higher situation and even better.
I think that's an artifact of, you know, monetarist economic policy that's nearing its end, because the economy can't sustain itself with the way wealth is distributed. And so I think, again, there's a crisis point, and who knows how long it will last. But if we look at the example of Spotify, right, that's a customized subscription that learns about me and presents me with stuff I've never heard that it thinks I'm going to like, right? And that's based on my own behavior, and then people who are like me, right? And so these sorts of things, that's a different consumer world, isn't it?
No, it's being catered to in a more segmented, targeted way, instead of, you know, mass market. Everyone has the same kind of brand. Now you can get all kinds of choices.
But it makes us more or less atomized. It causes more atomized society. So in this case, coming up with this some foresight would be hard, because when you're coming with the atomized society, it means that each person would be a set of data, and you have to analyze each set of data, which would be a huge amount of data.
But the thing is that set of data is meaningless unless it's linked with other people's set of data. So it's not just, we're becoming much more networked than we are being atomized, because the meaning of my data is linked to the meaning of the data of everybody I interact with, right?
No, the technology sometimes enable us to be 100%, not 100%, but more independent from others.
You keep saying my data, but in Spotify and all these other apps, it's proprietary. It's somebody else's data. There's a massive power differential. I can't do what Google can do with their data. I'm giving them my data. Sidewalk Toronto is going to give them, you know, data about the movement of human beings through an entire neighborhood in perpetuity, perhaps, and all that goes to them. We don't actually, as individuals, or as kind of digital individuals, which is, it's all about how we're divided.
Individuals.
We don't get to use that. I don't get to custom tailor the algorithm that Spotify uses, right? Or if I'm frustrated with how YouTube is perpetually trying to suggest more and more radical videos in its video suggestion algorithm, I don't get to tailor the algorithm. I'm just a subject who consumes the media in this case, right?
You just need to train like a bunch of bots to help you get the videos
you
that
need
you want.
AI.
Trust me, I'm
What you're talking about is not a force of nature. It's a legislative framework, right? that can change, and that may actually be a type of uncertainty. At what point? I mean, when copyright arose, it was to break the power of the king to have a monopoly of who will publish the Bible, right? That's where the origins of copyright. It wasn't a natural law. So, you know, there is this crisis that's boiling around what are the appropriate business models to non-rival goods like information.
Right? Here's another one. It sort of counters yours, and it's ethical kind of thing too. Let us say you have a medical condition of some sort, and your clinician asks you if you're willing to allow your data, anonymized, to be put into a pool of data for epidemiological purposes to understand a particular kind of affliction. So it's not you as the named person, but it's your data. And you're one of many others in a large sample. So then you say yes, and so you're anonymized, you're now part of this, and 5 years later, a cure has come out of now analyzing this, or a pathway to a cure. So where do you share your data? Well, I mean,
I've totally lost how any of this is related to Maurice's original question.
Well, it's consumers, right?
Well, she was talking about consumers. We're selling our data, or we're giving our data.
Well,
but she was also talking more about learning.
But yeah, it's also, again, because we have to think of information as an anti-rival good. If you have an apple, and I eat the apple you possess, you're diminished. But if you possess a book, and I read your book, you still own the book. But now the book is more valuable, because now we both read it, and we can talk about it and gain new insights on it. So information and knowledge is anti-rival, and what we're doing is trying to colonize an anti-rival good with business models based on scarce goods. Right? Now, that's a legislative framework, not a force of nature. So this shift that we're in, and who knows where it's going to go, it's a true uncertainty. But consumers in the world of information, right? Because I don't own my birth date, otherwise I'd have to kill the doctor and the nurse. Well, my mother's already dead, and anybody who ever celebrated my birthday in order to, you know, my information is only socially created, and its value increases when it can be, like Peter said, when it can be combined and analyzed. So that the problem is not the nature of information, it's the old business models that think you can enclose the commons, right? Because informations are
the Apple
commons,
approach.
right?
Yeah.
So the new world of business, I think, right? This is one of the things that Jeremy Rifkin talks about, the displacement, not the eradication, but the displacement of a market as dominant towards collaborative commons. Because when it's information as a commons, when we can see, we can talk to each other and form rules about a commons are well managed.
That's a public space.
Yeah,
So I think that's one of the transitions we're realizing now, especially in the last couple of elections and with Brexit, that these private companies are creating public spaces, but we don't conceptualize them as public
Simulated
spaces. We don't
public
make
spaces,
the kind
like
of
malls.
social rules that we make in a public
Yes.
space. I think we've done well on it. So.
Next session.
This is like a graduate.
Good wrap up. I like that.
But I think it's all relevant to this concept of consumer, right? We're consumers of what's physically good, that's one set of rules, but when it's knowledge and information, we don't have the right rules yet.
We should definitely have a session on that.
Yeah.
I think a lot of public servants
Yeah, we
would
do.
appreciate having that kind of conversation. So thank you for giving us the two
Inspiring
talks.
us.
Thank you, John.
Yeah.
And also thank you, Peter, for assisting with
We spent hours planning.
planning.
The paper fell on the floor, I picked it up.
And everyone who's here who came here to share knowledge and sort of even consume, and mostly consuming. And also our wonderful host, who also hosts domains.
And thank you for getting the sound device, because otherwise I would have been the mouthpiece.
This all fits my background. So.
Thank you for organizing it, guys.
Thanks, Louisa.
Thank you.
What's the next one?
What is the next one? Good question.
You have a topic?
I think we just came up with
Are you
going to have it as something separate, or you're going to shift it to the hacker nights?
So, Hack Nights. Civic Tech is happening every Tuesday this month at
Grounded, the coffee shop.
Yeah.
Boston.
And we're still looking for new venues. So if you know anyone who has an office that hosts a crew this size.
For what night?
For Civic Tech.
They're Tuesday night, yeah?
How many?
It's every Tuesday night?
Normally 20-ish.
So we have a few on the spot. We're trying to get in that Institute on Governance said that they would host us too, and we have this place. So we have a few places, but it's also, definitely some shared interests with this group.
Well, there's some office space just up the street on George. Do you know my Byward office?
Yeah. So they're a good one too.
You know Eric?
Yeah.
Yeah. So next to him, not his Byward office space.
Someone else's
He's a shared space. It's called my Byward office.
Yeah.
But there's a room next door, and it's reasonably large, and the tables can be laid out. Chairs and so on can be set up. I know the people there.
Oh yeah.
To ask them, it's unused space. I mean, it's really nice space. Just it could be rented.